Okay, today's daf Kuf Lamed Daled, which is 134. We are at the top of the page, second line. Lo shachak me'erev Shabbat. So we're talking about applying cumin to the wound of the Brit Milah, which would be a way of perhaps preventing infection or helping it to heal. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught dvarim she'en osin lamilah b'Shabbat. There are things that if you do perform a Brit Milah on Shabbat, you're not allowed to do, but if you perform the Brit Milah on Yom Tov, you are allowed to do. So what are these? What are examples of this? Shochakin la kamun. You can grind cumin, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, but you can grind the cumin to apply to the wound if it's on Shabbat, if it's on Yom Tov. V'torfin la yain v'shemen, and you can mix together wine and oil, because remember, you're not allowed to mix wine and oil together in a bowl because it looks like cooking. It looks like you're preparing something to cook. But on Yom Tov, obviously that's allowed. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, "Ma'ishina kamun b'Yom Tov dechaze lekdera yain v'shemen chazinami b'Shabbat lechole." Why do you allow somebody in Yom Tov to grind up cumin to place on the wound of the Brit Milah? Because you could grind up cumin for the purposes of cooking, right? If you wanted to grind cumin into the pot, you'd be allowed to do it. So anything that you'd be allowed to do for other reasons on Yom Tov or Shabbat, you're allowed to do for the healing of the wound of the Brit Milah. So if that's the case, so that's why you're allowed to grind cumin on Yom Tov, because you're allowed to put it into the pot that you're cooking. So why on Shabbat are you not allowed then to mix wine and oil, since wine and oil you'd be allowed to mix for a choleh? If somebody is sick, you're allowed to mix wine and oil together in order to give them. So why should it be any different here? Why are we prohibiting it? True, normally we don't mix wine and oil together because it looks like we are preparing to cook like an omelet over the stove or something like that. But in this case, for a choleh, you're allowed to. The Tanyas we learned in a brayta in Torfinyan B'Shem and the choleh b'Shabbat, because the Tanakama said in this brayta that you're not allowed to mix wine and oil even for a sick person. But Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Mishum Rabbi Meir, af torafin yain v'shemen. That Shimon ben Elazar said that Rabbi Meir said that you can mix wine and oil if it's for a sick person. In other words, if you're making a concoction of some sort for a sick person, then we put aside the rabbinic prohibition of mixing wine and oil because it looks like cooking, and we allow you to do it. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, once upon a time, Chash Rabbi Meir b'me'av. Rabbi Meir had a stomach ache or some kind of abdominal issue. Ubikashnu litrof lo yain v'shemen v'lo inachnu. And we wanted to mix for him wine and oil in this mixture on Shabbat, and he wouldn't allow us. Amarnu lo, we said to him, Dvarecha yivadu b'chayecha. Are you going to allow your words to be negated while you're still alive? Meaning, if you don't stand by your principles, you said that a sick person, you can mix wine and oil for them. If you're not going to stand by your principles while you're alive, who's going to keep them for posterity? In other words, how can you not follow your own shita? So Amar Lanu, he said to us, even though I say that you're allowed to do it against my friend, my colleagues say you're not allowed to mix wine and oil for a sick person. I say you are. But nonetheless, I think the door might be locked. You have to go around the side. Go out the side. No, you should go out the side because it's closed. So even though my colleagues and I have a disagreement, and I permit really somebody to mix wine and oil for a sick person, for my entire life, I never had enough courage, or I never had the heart, literally, to violate the words of my colleagues. In other words, I could never go against the majority in practice. In theory, I disagree with them, but in practice, I can't do it. So what's the point here? So he didn't allow himself to follow that in practice, but for everyone else he would have permitted it. So wine and oil he would have allowed to be mixed for a sick person. So just like we can mix wine and oil for a sick person, according to Rabbi Meir, we should also be allowed to mix wine and oil on Shabbat to apply to the wound of the child that had a Brit Milah. Shouldn't be an issue. Okay, the answer is that over there, when it came to Rabbi Meir, you didn't need to stir it. You just combined it together. In other words, they just wanted to combine oil and wine together and let him drink it or something to heal his stomach problems. Here, you actually have to mix it into something new, stir it into something new. And it's the stirring of it that's a problem. Okay, that's why we can't do it on Shabbat. So, why can't we do the same thing here? Just not stir it. Just combine them and not stir it. So the answer is, that's exactly what the Mishnah says. It says put one at a time. It didn't mean you have to apply one at a time to the wound of the Brit Milah, that first the wine, then the oil. It meant just put the wine and the oil into a bowl and don't mix them. And just apply it.
But then it's separate.
They'll be separate. They won't blend together, but essentially you'll still get them both applied. I guess it still works. So that would be allowed. So in fact, whatever you're allowed to do on Shabbat for a Choleh, you're allowed to do for the Brit Milah. No problem. That's exactly correct. So now, Tan Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in Mesanenin et Chardal Mesanenet Shelo, you're not allowed to sift the mustard in its special sifter. It has a special sifter to remove, I guess, the coarser parts of the mustard. Ve'en mematkin oto begachelet, and you're not allowed to sweeten it with coals. In other words, what would happen? They would put coals together with the mustard, and the mustard would become sweetened by basically by putting the coal, burying the coal in the mustard. The coal would be extinguished, but somehow it would impart a flavor to the mustard, which they called sweetening it. Somehow it would bring it some kind of a special taste. Now this is talking about on Yom Tov, by the way, not on Shabbat. So you're not allowed to sift your mustard, and you're not allowed to put coal in it in order to extinguish the coal, basically, and somehow get flavor for the mustard. Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef, Abai said to Rav Yosef, how is this different from what we learned? It says you're allowed to put an egg through the sifter, through the sieve, basically, of the mustard. And why would they do that? Basically, they would put the egg on the sifter. The yellow of the egg would go down and make it yellow, make the mustard yellow. I guess even back then they wanted the mustard to look nice and yellow. The white would stay on top. It says you're allowed to do that. You're permitted to do that. So why are you not permitted to put the mustard itself through the sieve? The difference is because when it comes to the egg, you're not really doing any kind of borer over there. You're not doing any separating, because you're going to eat the white of the egg and you're going to eat the yellow. It's just that you wanted the yellow to go in one place, meaning in with the mustard, and you wanted the white to stay on top, and you're going to eat it separately.
It's not borer, it's sifting, which is different.
It's borer. It's another type of separating parts.
Sifting is part of
separating. They're all kind of similar. They're all kind of similar.
When you're sifting the egg, you're really separating.
You're really just separating the white from the yellow. So
I thought they would separate that.
Here you're going to use both of them equally. It's just that one is going into the food below, one is going into the mustard, and one is going to be kept for something else. So you're not really. Whereas with the mustard, you're sifting it also to get the coarser parts. The coarser parts are really edible, but they're not ideal. You don't want them as much. So by sifting, you're really separating the better, the finer mustard from the coarser mustard, and that's what you want. Or you're separating, let's say, the seeds of the mustard from the husk, or whatever it is that you want to get rid of. Now, really, they're both edible, but you'd rather have a purer thing. So it's rabbinically prohibited, actually, not biblically prohibited in that case. Now we said, why we said that you're not allowed to sweeten the mustard with a coal. So but it says in the Braita that you're allowed to. So that if you're using a smoldering gachelet, a smoldering coal from something metal. Okay? In other words, a piece of metal that's smoldering, you're allowed to use. Why? Because it doesn't produce charcoal. A smoldering piece of wood, you're not allowed to use because it produces charcoal. And remember that really the malacha of extinguishing is when you produce charcoal. So when you have metal, you're not really performing a biblical, if you extinguish metal, you're not really performing a biblical malacha anyway. So on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do this and allow the coal to be extinguished because it doesn't really produce coal. You're allowed to
throw water on
smoldering metal. It's only rabbinically prohibited in that case because it doesn't produce charcoal, and therefore it's not really the malacha. Okay, so Amar le Abai Rav Yosef. Abai says to Rav Yosef, why is it that you're telling me that I'm not allowed to put mustard on top of coals, or I'm not allowed to bury a coal in mustard? Right? So the reason you're not allowed to do that is because of that's because of extinguishing. So why am I allowed to? And this is on Yom Tov. This is not Shabbat. So why am I allowed to roast meat over coals? Why should I be allowed to roast meat over coals? So we answered him, the answer is because there, when it comes to roasting meat over coals, it's true that the juice of the meat is going to drip onto the coals and possibly extinguish some of them. But that's inevitable. In other words, in the process of cooking, if you're going to roast meat, that's what's going to happen. Here, you don't need to put the coal into the mustard to sweeten it. There, the cooking process is that the meat is going to drip liquid, and by its nature, it's going to extinguish it. In the process of cooking, it's going to extinguish parts of the flame. It's unavoidable as part of the process of cooking. Amar le Abai Rav Yosef. Abai said to Rav Yosef, "Ma'ole gaben? Are you allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov?" Amar le asur. It's prohibited. So he asked him, "Ma'ishna milisha? How does it differ from kneading? Since what you're doing is you're taking these parts, basically, of the cheese and you're curdling it into a solid. And what you do when you knead is you take the flour and you take the water and you make it into a solid sort of an entity. So what is the difference?" Amar le hatam la ifshar hachifshar. The answer is again, when it comes to cheese making, you can do that before Yom Tov. You don't have to do that on Yom Tov. When it comes to kneading, if you want fresh bread, you have to knead bread. You have no choice. Correct? You have to knead it. So then they asked him, but wait a second, didn't the people of Narda say that that even 1 day old cheese is good, meaning you can make cheese the same day and eat it and it's good. So maybe I want to make fresh cheese on Yom Tov. So why are you stopping me? So he said, they said like this, even 1 day old cheese is good. Older cheese is better. We know aged cheese is considered better, right? So the idea here is that since aged cheese is better, it's considered something that you should have done before Yom Tov. Meaning even aesthetically, making fresh cheese is not a positive, because making fresh cheese is inferior. So really it's something that the rabbis prohibited you to do, because they wanted you to do things that could be done before Yom Tov ahead of time. So you should have here done this ahead of time and not done it on Yom Tov itself. So now the Gemara goes on, you cannot make the little pocket. They would put a sort of pocket of cloth over the place of the milah in order to protect the wound and to allow it, to enable it to heal faster. Amar Abai said, Amar li mother told me hachaluk dianuka, that what you do when you put a piece of cloth over the place of the milah, what you do is you have to lefanei lisitra leilae dilma midbik garda mine va'ate lideh kerut shofcha. That what can happen is, what you need to do is you need to turn the cloth outside. In other words, inside out. You want to have the seam facing outwards. Why do you want to have the seam facing outwards? Because if you have the seam facing inwards, what might happen? A loose string is going to get caught in the wound. Right? Because that can happen. Right? If you have loose strings, they can get caught in the wound. The skin heals over the string. And then when you take the wound out, ouch, not only ouch, but it could cause some permanent damage. We're very worried about that. So therefore, you should turn it inside out. Smart thinking. Now, remember that Abaye's mom was not really his mom. He was actually raised by a nurse that he called mother, as Rashi explains on the side, Omanto, his nurse. And she also said, actually, first to tell something more about her, what she used to do was she would make a special kind of covering for the Brit Milah, where there was where there was sort of an extra piece of cloth in between where the seam was and where the head of the penis was, so that the strings from the seam wouldn't rest on it. So she made a special kind of extra piece of cloth jutting out on these coverings that she fashioned for that purpose, so that the wound wouldn't be exacerbated by the covering. Amar Abai said, "Hayanukad delet lechaluk, laite belita deitle sifta, v'lechrechei lesifta letatei." He said, if you don't have a special covering, one of these special gloves that they would put over the Brit Milah, so what you do is instead just take a rag, basically, that has a seam, tie it in such a way that the hem of the cloth is underneath the head of the organ, and then fold it over again in such a way that any seams that are sticking out away from the wound and not towards the wound. In other words, you can make a makeshift kind of a bandage here, or a makeshift kind of a glove, where the seams will be away from the wound and will not get caught in them.
So if there are seams, but you don't have them.
Right. Well, he said that he's saying that the benefit of having some kind of is to be able to tie it, that it'll stick it, it'll tie more better if it has that. But so that's why you're using it to tie. But it can also be dangerous, so you have to be careful. My mother said, that if there was a child that they couldn't find, his rectum is hidden somehow. They can't find it. I don't know why, though. The opening is not fully open. They're having a problem. He's having a problem with elimination. So what do? They put oil over him, and they put him outside in the sun. What they do is, after they put oil on him, they put him in the sun, and whatever is shining, there should be an area that's shining and looks almost like a glassy shine. So that's where they should take a barley corn and try to make a cut there to make an opening, and that's where the opening is. But you shouldn't use metal for this because it can cause inflammation. This is all kinds of interesting medical stuff about babies. Abai said, my mother told me, if a child will not drink, will not suckle, okay, it won't nurse. So what do you do? So mekar dekar pume. It's because his mouth is cold. So what you do? You should take a cup of burning coals and put them near his mouth to make his mouth hot. Don't put the coals in his mouth, obviously. And then once his mouth warms up, he will be able to nurse. Amar Abai, and Abai says, my mother told me that if you have a child who is not breathing properly, what you should do is you should wave a fan. You should fan him, and the fanning will help him to breathe. Amar Abai, and Abai says, my mother said, my mother told me, if a child is not breathing, is breathing but is not breathing comfortably, is not breathing as well as it should. Rashi says, "En ruchon nichnas v'yotzei yafeh." It's not breathing easily; it's breathing with difficulty. Let's say. So what you should do is you should bring the afterbirth of its mother, and you should put it on it. You should smear it on it, and it will start to breathe better. My mother told me that if you have a child that's too scrawny, you should take the afterbirth and you should wipe it on him from his scrawniest area to his widest area. And if he's too big, then you wipe it from the widest area to the scrawniest area. Amar Abai and Abai said, the afterbirth, yeah. The afterbirth, yeah. I guess it's the same. Amar Abai and Abai says, my mother told me, if you have a red-looking child, that's because the blood hasn't absorbed into it yet fully. So that what you should do is that you should wait till its blood absorbs in it, and then should you circumcise the child. That's true. If the child has any kind of illness, that would be probably we would call that some kind of a fever. We would assume it's some kind of fever if it's all red. But whatever, if the baby is all red, don't circumcise him until that's resolved. So what you do is that if you have green child, which green child means jaundice, I'm sure. Okay, they had the same issue. Then you wait till the jaundice passes and the child is red, and then you give him the brit milah. Yellow, green, yeah, same, yellowish, greenish. Yeah, that's what they're definitely talking about here, though. Which is fascinating that they paid a lot of attention to all these things. The Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Amar Rabbi Natan said. And Rabbi Natan was a mohel. So one time Rabbi Natan pamachat halachti lekrachei hayam. He went to the cities in the sea. Ubat isha achat lefanai, and a woman came before me. Shamala bena rishon vamet, sheni vamet. Her first two children had died from the brit milah, which is really sad. So shlishi, she brought heviato lefanai. She brought the third child before me. Reitiv shu adom. I saw that he was very red. He was all red. So I said, what did he realize? He realized that the child was ill. So I said to her, Hamtini lo ad sheyivla bo damo. Wait until his blood is absorbed within him. Himtina lo, she waited, ad shenivla bo damo, until the blood was absorbed. Umala oto v'chaya. And they did the Brit Milah and he lived. So obviously it worked. And they named the baby Natana Bavli because of me. Because I saved his life. Because he told her to wait. And then another story. Once I was in Kapotkia. Same story. A woman came who her first two children had died from Brit Milah, so she came to consult with me. Shlishi Eviatu Lefanai. She brought her third child before me and he was green. So what did I do? I saw that he didn't have any dam brit. In other words, he's not going to. There are two issues here. Number one, the child is not well, and number two, he's not going to produce any. He saw that he must be deficient in his blood. That's what they assumed. If you were green, I said to her, wait until his blood falls into him. She waited for him, and then she circumcised him, and then he lived. And they named him Natan Bavli too. So there were a lot of kids walking around named Natan Bavli, Nathan the Babylonian, because he was so popular because he saved their lives. Yeah, so we turn to Kuf Lamed Dalet Amud Bet with a new Mishnah. We wash the child before the Brit Milah and after the Brit Milah. And we can throw water on him with our hands, but not with. In other words, if we're going to put water on him, we use our hands. We don't use a vessel. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, if the third day after the Brit Milah falls on Shabbat, we also wash the child on that day. Because it says that the third day, remember the story of Shechem, they attacked the people of Shechem specifically on the third day because that's the day that you're weakest. So with a child as well, the third day is considered a critical day. And therefore, even if the third day falls out on Shabbat, we do things that normally wouldn't be permitted on Shabbat, like washing the baby in hot water, and even maybe other interventions, because it's a very sensitive day. Safek vandroginos, if you have a safek. Now according to Rashi, with the safek here, we are talking about a safek about when it was born, because in those days they believed that a child that was born in the 8th month of pregnancy was not viable. So they wouldn't consider it worth giving a Brit Milah to this baby because they didn't think it was viable, and they figured that it's just a Chilul Shabbat to give it a Brit Milah on Shabbat. Others say that the safek here means it's a safek whether it was born on Shabbat or not. In other words, if you're not sure if the baby was born on Shabbat or not, then you can't give it a Brit Milah the following Shabbat. Right, if it was after sunset and you're not exactly sure, you have to push it off to Sunday. So so that's what other Rishonim say.
After Shabbat is not a safek, it's ben Hashemashot that it's a safek.
No, like either on Friday or on Shabbat.
Or
it could be a ben Hashemashot. You don't know if it was born on Shabbat or not, so you can't do the Milah on Shabbat.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. So either way, there's a safek here. So or androgynous is somebody who is a hermaphrodite. So they have both female and male parts. So you don't do a Brit Milah on Shabbat. Okay? Actually, Rabbi Yehuda says a safek, you're correct. You don't violate Shabbat with a safek. You only have a doubt. But androgynous, one that definitely has male parts, then you definitely circumcise them even on Shabbat. We're going to see more discussion of this later.
Because the obligation is...
The obligation is a real one. Yeah, he says there's no difference in the obligation. As long as he has that part, he needs a Brit Milah. That's it. So the Gemara says, V'ha'amrat reisha marchitzin. So there's a problem here. Because in the beginning of the Mishnah, it says, marchitzin takatan, that you can wash the child before the Milah and after the Milah. And then it says you can throw water on him with the hand, but not with the vessel. But you just said you can wash him. It's a contradiction. First it says you can bathe him, and then it says you can put water on him, but only with your hand, not with a vessel. So that doesn't seem to be consistent. So Rav Yehuda v'Rabba bar Avua Damrei Tarvayu Ketzad Tane. What it means is, how do you do it? Marchitzin takatan ben lefnei milah ben achar milah Ketzad mizalfin alav bayarav alo b'kli. In other words, they're saying that that's explaining the first statement when it said you can wash the child before the milah and after the milah, and then it says you can throw water on him, but you can't use a vessel. It's explaining how can you wash the child only by throwing water on him with your hand. Take water out of the thing and put it on him, but you can't use a vessel to wash him. It's an explanation of the statements, okay? But however, Rava does not like this. Amar Rava marchitzin katane, but it says marchitzin, washing. It doesn't say throwing. Amar Rava, rather Rava says haki katane. This is what it means. Marchitzin etakatan ben milefnei milah ben achara milah bayom harishon kedarko ubayom hashlishi shechal להיות בשבת mizalfin alav bayarav alo b'kli. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says marchitzin etakatan bayom hashlishi shechal להיות בשבת. In other words, what it's saying is that that according to Rava, the issue here is that on the first day, everybody agrees that you can wash the child in the normal way. If the Brit Milah is on Shabbat, everybody agrees you can wash him in the normal way. And then they said that on the third day, you can throw the water on him if the third day falls on Shabbat. And that's where Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes around and says that you can even bathe them in the normal way on on Shabbat if the third day falls out on Shabbat.
In other words, the disagreement is only regarding the third day, not the first 2 days. The first 2 days.
Now that's a question. So according to Rashi and many of the Rishonim, the first 2 days everybody agrees you can bathe them normally. The third day is where it's a question. Where with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah coming along and saying that you can wash him normally even on the third day, and the Chachamim saying on the third day you have to just spritz water on him basically, but you can't wash him normally. The Rambam and the Rif say no, that the Chachamim only allow it on the day of the Milah. The second day they don't allow it. The question is about the second day, okay? So we're assuming that the way Rashi is interpreting it is, first and second, what Rava means is, first and second day everybody agrees you can bathe them. Third day, that's where you have a machloket. Rambam and Rif say, no, first day everybody agrees you can bathe them. Second day everybody agrees you can't bathe them. Because where does it say anything about second day? Third day, now you have a machloket between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Chachamim, because the third day is a especially bad day, apparently.
Oh, then it would be the opposite. Then on the third, because on the first and the second day...
Forget second. Rambam is saying second, no. In other words, there's a machloket here about the second. Rashi interprets it like this, that first and second are definitely bad. So everybody agrees you can wash the child on the first and second day, even in a way you wouldn't normally be allowed to do. And then on the third day, that's where you have a disagreement between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Chachamim. However, according to the Rif and the Rambam, the first day is the only day they agree on. Second day, everybody agrees you can't bathe the child. Because it doesn't say anywhere that the second day is special.
The basis for our argument is how much worse it is on the third day?
In other words, the first and third days are unique. The first day is unique because it's the day of the actual Brit Milah. And the third day is unique only according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Because it says in the Pasuk, Vahi vayom hashlishi.
And the reason for the argument itself is because on the third day it's
more severe. But according to the Rambam and the Rif, their version is that the second day isn't considered severe at all. So there's like a lull in the action on the second day, and then the third day it comes back with a vengeance or something like that. That's the way that the Rambam and Rif are interpreting it. According to Rashi, the first 2 days it's bad, and the only question is whether the third day is bad enough to justify extending it for one more day. Okay, so that's it's an interesting machloket here. Now, but either way, if we go with Rashi's interpretation or Rambam, it doesn't matter on this point. So according to Rava, this is the machloket. The machloket is, first day, let's say, just to make it simple, okay, everybody agrees you can bathe the child normally. Third day, there you have a machloket. The rabbis say you can spritz him with water. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can even bathe him normally. Okay? This is the interpretation of Rava. According to the first interpretation of Rav Yehuda and Rabba bar Avua, they said that according to the Chachamim, even on the first day you're not allowed to bathe him normally. You're only allowed to spritz him with water. So Rava and Rav Yehuda are having a machloket about what the Chachamim hold. According to Rav Yehuda, the Chachamim hold that you're never allowed to fully bathe the child, even on the first day.
According to Rava.
According to Rav Yehuda. Rava says no. On the first day, everybody agrees you can fully normally bathe the child. Okay, that's really the essential machloket. And then on the third day, according to Rav Yehuda, of course, the Chachamim are only going to allow you to spritz the child, because even on the first day, they only allow you to do that. Okay? And Rava says, here you have a machloket between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, whether you can bathe the child or not. Okay? Because actually the Chachamim allow you to bathe the child on the first day, according to Rava. Now, Tanya kevate de Rava. There's a braita that supports Rava. Marchitzin katan ben lifnei milah ben lachar milah. Bayom harishon kedarko. So you can wash the child before the milah and afterwards. On the first day you can do it in the normal way. And on the third day, if it falls out on Shabbat, you can spritz him with water, but you cannot bathe him. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer marchitzin et hakatan bayom hashlishi shechal liot b'Shabbat v'afu b'shin raya ledavar zecher ledavar. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you can wash the child in the normal way even on the third day. Notice they never mention the second day, which is where the Rambam gets the idea that the second day doesn't apply. Because it says on the third day they were especially in pain. And when they spritz him with water, they don't do it with cup or with a plate or with a vessel. They do it with the hand. So what do you see from that? You see that that this supports Rava. Okay, At-ta'an le-tanakama. Of course, this last statement follows the tanakama because it's saying that because according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, both on the first day and the third day you're allowed to wash the child normally. The Chachamim say on the first day you can wash him normally, on the third day you can only spritz him with water, and then it's saying, and when you spritz him with water, it has to be with your hand, not with a vessel. Okay, so that supports Rava. That's clearly according to Rava what he's saying. Okay, now, so what does the Gemara do? So it says, so then the Gemara wants to know, why is it only a hint? In other words, the story of Shechem seems to clearly tell us that the third day is especially painful. So why is it only a hint to the idea that the third day is especially painful? Why isn't it a clear proof? Because look, they didn't attack them on the first day. You would think the first day. Why did they wait till the third day? So, Mishum de gadol lo salik bisra haya, katan salik be bisra haya. The answer is because you might say those were adults. Adults, the third day is really bad because they have a hard time recovering. The child recovers faster. Maybe the third day is not so bad for him. We don't have a proof. There was once a situation, an actual practical situation, where somebody wanted to know could they bathe the child normally on the first day of Brit Milah, and Rava told them they could. And then right after that, Rava became sick. Amar ana bahadei targimna desavei lamali. He said, why did I have to get into this argument with the other rabbis, with Rav Yehuda and Rabba bar Avua? Why did I have to get in this argument with them? God is punishing me for going against them and being lenient. So he said, Amrule Rabbanan, the rabbi said the Rava, Vahatani Kivate, it says Kivate Demar, is there not a baraita that supports the position of the master? In other words, you showed that there's a baraita that supports you. Well, what's the issue? Amar, we said, yeah, but Matnitin Kivatayu Daika, but the truth is that our Mishnah seems to follow them more. Our Mishnah fits better with their position. The Baraita supports me, but the Mishnah supports them. Mimai, how do you see that? Because it says that because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can wash the child on the third day when it falls on Shabbat. Hi, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Omer marchitin, af marchitin miba'ilei. He says like this, that if you're going to tell me that the Tanakama, in other words, Rav Yehuda is really supported from our Mishnah. Because what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says that that Rabbi Elazar comes along and says you can wash the child on the third day. Now, if they're correct, in other words, that the Tanakama said that you can only spritz the child with water, okay, both on the first day and on the third day, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes along and says on the third day you're allowed to wash the child, it makes sense according to them. Right? Because he's coming along and saying, no, you can wash the child, even on the third day. But if I'm right, and the Tanakama means you can actually wash them on the first day rather, and you only have to spritz them on the third day, so why doesn't Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say, af marchitzin, you can even wash them on the third day? Okay, why doesn't he say you can even wash them on the third day? Because according to me, the Chachamim are saying you can wash them on the first day, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is coming along and say you can even wash them on the third day.
But that's what they
see, in other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it actually fits better. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim never allowed you to do any washing. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes along and says you can wash them on the third day, meaning on the third day and certainly on the first day. But according to me, that even the Chachamim said that you could wash them on the first day. And they're limiting their position and saying that you can only spritz them on the third day. So then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's language should have been af marchitzin. You can even wash them on the third day. Okay, that's how it should have been written. Meaning not only can you wash them on the first day, you can even wash them, the child, on the third day. From the fact that he says you can wash them, it implies that the Chachamim never mentioned washing. Because he doesn't say even. You can even wash them on the third day, which is what he would say if they said you can wash them on the first day but not the third day. Then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah should have said you can even wash them on the third day. So the fact that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah doesn't use the word even shows that I'm wrong. It's against my interpretation.
Oh, that's
Okay?
German insisted.
Right. He's saying it's weaker. It's a weaker interpretation of the Mishnah. It fits with the bright that's weaker in the Mishnah.
Right.
Okay. So Kiyata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Elazar Halachak Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. When Rav Dimi came from Israel, he said that Rabbi Elazar said that the halacha follows Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Okay, so Havuba b'ma'arava, they raised an issue in the West. They raised the following issue: Harchatat kol gufo, harchatat milah. When we say washing the child, do we mean we can wash the area of the wound, the actual area of the brit milah, or the whole body? So Amar lahu, he said to them, Haumei Rabbanan, one of the rabbis said to them, Rabbi Yaakov Shemei, one of the rabbis by the name of Rabbi Yaakov answered them and said, Mistabra harchatat kol gufo. It must mean his entire body. Why? Di'isal kadatach harchatat milah, migaram mechamin al gabe makkah. Damarav in mon in chamin v'shemen al gabe makkah b'Shabbat. Because if all you're telling me is that you can apply hot water to the place of the milah, you can do that anytime. Because didn't we already say, wasn't it already taught that Rav says you can put hot water and oil on a makkah, on a wound on Shabbat? So why should Brit Milah need a special dispensation? Rather, we must assume that the special dispensation is that you can bathe the entire body on Shabbat, not just the place of the milah. Matkifla Rav Yosef raised an objection. Really? You don't make a distinction between water heated on Erev Shabbat and water heated on Shabbat? Meaning to say that the chidush here is that normally if water was heated on Shabbat, not by a non-Jew, or by accident by a Jew, or whatever it was, you can't use that water even for a wound. And here we're telling you can use it for the baby. Even though normally you wouldn't be able to use it. You can use it for the baby. So maybe the chidush is not that you can wash the baby's entire body. Maybe you can't wash the baby's entire body. You can only wash the place of the milah. But the chidush is you're allowed to wash with water that was heated on Shabbat. Okay? So now but then Rav Dimi says no. How do you know they're talking about water that was heated on Shabbat? Maybe they're talking about water that was heated on Erev Shabbat. And the chidush is that with water that was heated on Erev Shabbat, normally you can't wash your whole body. Here you can wash the entire body of the baby. Right? In other words, maybe that's the chidush here. That you're allowed to that you're allowed to use the water that was heated from Erev Shabbat. Normally the water that was heated from Erev Shabbat, you can only wash one limb. And now here you can wash the entire body of the baby.
Both of these arguments are baseless. In other words, they're just theories.
Right, well, they're trying to figure this out. So Amar Abai says, I wanted to answer, but Rav Yosef answered for me. The reason is because it's a danger. Okay? In other words, since it's a danger, we're allowed to use even water that was heated on Shabbat itself. Itmar Nami, we similarly learned, Kiyata Ravin, Amar Biyabaw, Amar Bielazar, Amar Ela, Amar Biyabaw, Amar Biyochanan, Halachak Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Ben Bachamin Shuchmu b'Shabbat, Ben Bachamin Shuchmu b'Erev Shabbat, Ben Archatzat Kol Gufo, Ben Archatzat Milah, Mesh Sakana Hilo. That the reason why you're allowed to do this is you're allowed to use water, whether the water was heated on Erev Shabbat or the water was heated on Shabbat itself, it doesn't matter, you're allowed to use it. And you're allowed to wash the entire body of the baby, or you're allowed to wash the place of the milah for sure, because and you're allowed to wash even the entire body because it was considered to be a sakana.
A sakana, so then even a Jew is allowed.
Right, even a Jew would be allowed to in an emergency, right. So there's actually a machloket in the among the Rishonim. What happens if you had the water ready and then it spilled before the Brit Milah? Mm-hmm. So now you're going to have a problem, because if you do the Brit Milah, now you're going to have to reheat the water again on Shabbat. You're going to have to cook water on Shabbat to save the baby's life. Are you allowed to do the Brit Milah and then have to be mechalel Shabbat to protect the baby? Since that's something really you should have had the hot water prepared before. So there's a big discussion in the Rishonim what you do in that case.
Yeah, but if it's a sakana, it doesn't matter. If it's a sakana,
no, the question is, can you even do the brit then? Maybe you should say, you know what, I'm not going to do the brit then, because I'm creating a sakana, then I'm going to have to violate Shabbat. Right. So that's the issue. Now the Shulchan Aruch ends up saying that actually nowadays our custom is not to bathe the baby anyway, so it's no big deal. Okay, we don't really bathe the baby before and after the milah like they used to. Gufat said, we go back to what we discussed before. Amar Rav, the Rav said, "En mon in hamin b'shemen me'al gabe makkah b'Shabbat." We don't prevent somebody from putting hot water or putting oil on a wound on Shabbat. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, "Noten chutz lamakkah v'shotet v'yored lamakkah." Don't put it directly on the wound, because that looks like healing. It looks like a medical procedure. Put it on the side, and it will drip onto the wound. Do it indirectly. They raise an objection. It says you're not allowed to put oil or hot water on a cloth to put on a wound on Shabbat. So that's not because of healing, but because you're going to squeeze out the rag. That's why. But applying it directly, Rav would say, is okay. So then they said Tashma in notnin chamin v'shemen al gabei moch shel gabei makah b'Shabbat. It says you can't even put hot water and oil on a cloth that's already on the wound. So therefore, shouldn't be a concern about squeezing. But still, there we're still worried you might squeeze it. Okay, because it's on a cloth. But applying it directly should be allowed. Tanya Kavadei de Shmuel, in the end, we have a Braita that supports Shmuel. That it says you can't put hot water directly on a wound on Shabbat, nor can you put oil directly on a wound, but you can put it outside of the wound and it will drip down. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Notnin al Gabei Makah, Moch Yavesh, V'Safog Yavesh. You can put on a wound either a dry cloth or a dry sponge. About lo gemi yavesh, but not a. You can't put a dry. What's the word? What do they call it? Gemi is like a vine, a piece of. What do they translate it as?
We may not place hot water and oil upon a wound on the Shabbat, but we may place outside the wound.
Yeah, a little bit further than that. How do they translate the gemi there?
A dry cloth or a dry sponge.
No, the next one. What was the next one?
Not a dry reed.
Reed, okay, reed. That was the word I was looking for, right?
Rag.
Not a vine, a reed. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so reed. So you can't put a reed. And velo katitin yavishin. And you can't put pieces of garments that are old, that are dry on it. Okay? So then, Kasha, the question is, katitin. First you said you can put a dry cloth, and then you said you can't put dry pieces of cloth. So which one is it? So the answer is that one is talking about new, one is talking about old. So Rashi says that if you have new pieces of cloth, they have healing properties to them, apparently. So you can't put those on because it's like considered putting a medicine on. But the old ones you can, because they're not going to heal themselves. They protect the wound maybe from further damage, but they're not going to be, they don't have any healing properties of their own. Amar Abai says, Shema Mina, you can learn from this, Hane Katitin Masu, that new pieces of cloth that have never been placed on a wound before have healing properties, and therefore should be placed on a wound, and they will help the wound to heal, or they will help they will help it to heal faster. So what we see from here is that. And actually, there's another version of this. There's a reverse version that interprets that the new ones are the ones that don't heal, because they don't stick. They don't adhere as well to the body because they're new. And the old ones are the ones that do heal because they adhere more to the body because they've been used before. Okay? So that's the question of how to interpret the Gemara's answer here. But the point is that whichever one it is that is the healing one would not be allowed on Shabbat because it's considered like performing a direct medical remedy on Shabbat, as opposed to the one that's considered indirect or that's preventing further harm to the wound, which would be allowed. And as we said, the halacha is that anything that needs to be done for a child that's an emergency, that's considered an emergency on Shabbat, on the day of the Brit Milah, is allowed. On the third day, it's also allowed to bathe the child. But the custom today, the Shulchan Aruch says, is not really to bathe the child. It's not the practice anymore. So therefore, nobody really would rely on this permission anymore, or would heat the water. Right? It's no longer considered a sakana. It's no longer considered a danger, and therefore we would not allow somebody to heat up water on Shabbat for the child to be bathed in before or after the Brit Milah, or on the third day of the Milah. Not because we're not allowed to do things for an emergency that are considered critical, but because we're allowed to, because it's no longer considered critical. Yeah. That particular procedure is no longer considered critical. If it were critical, then it would be allowed on both the first and the third days. That would be the halacha.